This girl missed her boyfriend, who was in a coma, so much that she didn't know when he would wake up. So, she created an AI based on his memories. Her life with this AI boyfriend was very happy. It gradually made her forget about her real-life boyfriend. But one day, he woke up. However, due to a brain injury, he suffered from cognitive decline. Two boyfriends. One who cared for her meticulously. The other who felt incredibly distant. So, who would she choose? Early in the morning, while Jung-in was fast asleep, she was awakened by the sound of a phone ringing. It turned out to be her boyfriend Tae-ju, who was in space, calling to wake her up. They had been living apart for several years, but they were always very happy. Even from afar, Tae-ju always cared for his girlfriend meticulously. Every morning, he gently called her to wake her up for work. He even consistently reminded her to take her vitamins. Throughout the day, they would video call and chat. If Jung-in wanted to do something, Tae-ju would always gently support her. In the evening, they even shared delightful dinners together. Despite the distance, they never grew apart emotionally. When his girlfriend felt sad, he would often joke around to cheer her up. She thought life would continue happily like this. Until one day, she received a notification from the hospital that her boyfriend had woken up. This meant Tae-ju in the real world was now awake. She was so overjoyed because she thought she would never see him again. However, due to the accident, her boyfriend suffered from cognitive impairment. He couldn't even recognize the glass in front of him. But she found him very adorable, and even banged her head against the glass to tease him. She felt very fortunate that he had woken up and thought she would help him recover to his old self. However, after living together for a while, she gradually realized he had become very unfamiliar. He was nothing like the person she once knew. At night, he never slept. He just wandered the streets until morning, or sat motionless on the bed. While they were cooking together, he spilled boiling water and burned his hand. But he showed no reaction to the pain at all, which made her feel very strange. There were times when she had a high fever and couldn't find her medicine. And when she called Tae-ju, no one answered. So, she had to call her AI boyfriend. Though he wasn't real, he knew exactly where the fever medicine was, and even asked about her condition with concern, which left her feeling deeply touched. She slept all day until she was awakened by noise. It turned out her boyfriend had just returned home after being out all day. Seeing her weary appearance, he didn't even ask how she was doing. On top of that, he brought some street musicians over, causing a racket that disturbed the neighbors. In the past, Tae-ju wasn't someone who lacked manners like this. This behavior made her completely furious. So she stormed out late at night. Just then, her AI boyfriend called. Seeing Jung-in's tired face, he immediately started to cheer her up, and asked about her health with great care. The fact that her virtual boyfriend worked in outer space was something she had designed herself. It was the farthest place she could imagine. But now, she truly wished he could return to her immediately. The person who was by her side now seemed so far away that she couldn't reach him anymore. The next day, Jung-in was on her way to work when she realized she had forgotten her phone. Looking at the clock, she saw it was almost time for her boyfriend AI to call her. So, she hurried back home to get her phone. At the same moment, her boyfriend heard the phone ringing and realized Jung-in had left it behind. He decided to take it to her. When Jung-in returned home, she saw him holding her phone. She got angry and scolded him for touching her things without permission. Tae-ju felt his girlfriend was hiding something from him. But Jung-in didn't want him to find out about her AI boyfriend. That evening, after work, she didn't go home, but went to a bar to dance and drink with her virtual boyfriend, staying out until late at night. When she returned, she received news that her apartment building had caught fire. After the police reviewed the surveillance cameras, they discovered Tae-ju was the prime suspect. In front of the police and doctors, she repeatedly insisted that he wouldn't do such a thing. But when alone with Tae-ju, she began to believe he was the culprit, and warned him to be more cautious. Even though he denied being responsible, she still didn't believe him. Tae-ju wanted to mend their relationship, so he invited her on a trip. But she refused and let go of his hand. Walking away, lost, he was left alone, drowning in sadness. Since that day, the distance between the two grew larger and larger. Meanwhile, at the airport, a woman named Bai Li, an archaeologist, was waiting for her flight. She met a man named Sung Jun, and they had an engaging conversation. But due to time constraints, they only managed to exchange contact information. Bai Li's destination this time was a vast desert. She had been working far from home for years and hadn't seen her mother and daughter in a long time. Back home, her little girl missed her dearly, refusing to eat unless she could see her mother. So, in the following days, wherever Bai Li went, she would call her daughter, showing her the beautiful surroundings. This made the little girl excited about her mother's work. One day, while Bai Li was calling her daughter, her colleague called her to work, so she abruptly ended the call without saying anything. But she quickly realized she often did this to her daughter, leaving the girl feeling disappointed many times. Her daughter, however, was an understanding child, and knew her mother was busy, so she never complained, even though she really wanted to talk more with her mom. Bai Li, upon realizing her mistake, immediately called her daughter back and promised she wouldn't do that again. In fact, she told her daughter that she could call her anytime she missed her. From that point on, their relationship gradually improved. Every evening, Bai Li would often tell bedtime stories to her daughter. One day, she unexpectedly met Sung Jun again at a market. Since their first encounter, he had fallen head over heels for the cheerful, energetic girl. In fact, this meeting was no coincidence but orchestrated by him. However, Sung Jun was someone created to ensure the stability of this world. So, this love was destined to remain unfulfilled. As time went by, her daughter started to miss her mother more and more. During one phone call, Bai Li promised her daughter that once she grew older, she would bring her to where she worked. Hearing this, the grandmother was furious, snatched the phone, and scolded Bai Li, telling her not to say that again. In reality, the grandmother missed her daughter deeply, holding back tears during every phone call. But she might never see Bai Li again. The truth was, 3 years ago, Bai Li had passed away from an illness. Not wanting her young granddaughter to know the truth, the grandmother approached two scientists, He Ri and Hyeon Su, who had created Wonderland, a virtual world for artificial beings. She asked them to design an AI based on her daughter's memories. This technology to resurrect the deceased was now very common. Walking down the street, you could see it everywhere. Even Dr. He Ri herself had created her own parents in the virtual world. In fact, she was the very first user of Wonderland. But now, fearing for her granddaughter's safety, the grandmother decided to call the two scientists to disconnect Bai Li's server next month. The next day, the grandmother and granddaughter headed to the airport for a trip back to their hometown. While the grandmother turned to handle the check-in, the granddaughter disappeared, causing the grandmother to panic. She immediately called her daughter in the virtual world. At the same time, the two scientists who created the AI technology received a new order. It was to set up a virtual grandson, Jin Ji-yu, for the grandmother. The elderly woman, who had lived a hard life, lavished affection on this AI grandson, perhaps to compensate for what she could not achieve in the real world. However, the more she spoiled him, the more unruly he became. This forced the grandmother, already struggling, to take on 3 jobs simultaneously, just to afford gifts for the grandson. Seeing the grandmother's hardship, the scientists decided to provide a free new car for the grandson. However, emboldened by this, he demanded more. He then insisted the grandmother buy him a piano. Even in the virtual world, obtaining anything required fees paid by people in the real world. Thus, the grandmother had to work even harder. Until one day, the grandson received news from Dr. He Ri that his grandmother had passed away from overexertion. This left him speechless and stunned. With the client no longer alive, the two scientists decided to disconnect the grandson's server. In the end, the AI created to soothe the grandmother's longing ironically became the very thing that indirectly took her life. Back to Taeju. He went to the airport to find his girlfriend, who was about to board a flight. He wanted to understand why she had been so distant toward him. At that moment, her virtual boyfriend called. She decided to hand the phone to Taeju. When Taeju saw the person on the other end of the screen looked exactly like himself, both Taejos were utterly dumbfounded. At this moment, Taeju in the real world could only sit there frozen, unable to say anything. Meanwhile, Bai Li, upon learning that her daughter disappeared, drove through the desert to search for her. But time and again, she was blocked by a herd of camels. The repeated occurrences made her start to feel suspicious. But finding her daughter was more urgent, so she set aside her doubts for the moment. However, this time she had to face a violent storm, standing between the choice of retreating or continuing to search for her daughter. She did not hesitate and charged into the storm despite the road ahead being shrouded in darkness and obscured. But all of this was orchestrated by the two scientists to stop her. If she continued forward, she would reach the system's limit. As the storm grew increasingly intense, a car from the opposite direction sped toward her. The driver was none other than Sung Jun, the man she had met at the airport. He wasn't supposed to intervene in this matter, but perhaps his feelings for Bai Li were too deep. This time, he came to help her. When she woke up, she found herself standing before the Tree of Life, which her team had been searching for all this time. There, she pleaded with Dr. Hei Ri to help her find her daughter. Her profound maternal love moved Hei Ri, so the doctor decided to transfer her to the airport in the real world. At that moment, all smart devices there lost connection, and instead, they received a call from an unknown number. Tae Ju, sitting there, also received this call. When he answered, it was Bai Li's plea for help in finding her daughter. Just then, he saw a little girl sneaking into the staff office. It turned out the girl missed her mother so much that she tried to run off to find her. The girl ran onto the runway by herself, almost getting hit by a vehicle. But luckily, Tae Ju managed to rush in and save her just in time. After finding her daughter, Bai Li immediately called to talk to her. Both of them were at the same airport, but they couldn't meet each other. They could only talk over the phone. She decided to tell her daughter that she was no longer in this world and advised her to take care of herself. The daughter, being understanding, did not cry or fuss at all. She only wanted her mother to read her a story one last time. Afterward, Bai Li turned to talk to her own mother one last time. This time, her mother could no longer hold back her emotions and burst into tears. Bai Li knew she owed her mother a lot, but in this life, she could no longer repay her. She promised that in her next life, she would be the mother, and her mother would be the child, so she could take care of her just as her mother had cared for her. She knew this journey would be very far and very long, possibly with no return, so before leaving, she went to bid farewell to Sung Jun, the person who had accompanied her throughout her time living in the virtual world. As for Jung In, she also decided to disconnect the server of her virtual boyfriend. Not long before this, the two of them had sat down to talk about that virtual boyfriend. Tae Ju thought she no longer loved him, so he chose to let go for her happiness. However, she also realized that the virtual AI boyfriend was actually created from the memories of the man she loved. So she ran after Tae Ju. She was determined that no matter how difficult it was, she would live happily with him in the real world. When the server was disconnected, it was also the moment when virtual Tae Ju jumped off the spaceship. Since his previous encounter with himself in the real world, he realized that everything in this world was an illusion. So this time, he would truly return home to the one he loved. All the memories in his mind gradually faded and disappeared, marking the moment their lives returned to normal. It turns out that no matter how advanced technology becomes, we cannot rely entirely on it to live. Only by acknowledging reality and living truly happily can it be the best way for both the ones who leave and the ones who stay. The movie ends here. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed it, please give me a like and subscribe.